Now, please welcome Furman Trustee and Board Chair of Hollingsworth Funds, Tony McDade.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the third and final night of the 2025 Straight Talk series. It's my pleasure to be here tonight representing both Furman University and Hollingsworth Funds, and I can say confidently that both entities are grateful to the Riley Institute and Ollie at Furman for putting this important series together each year. I'd like to give a special welcome to any elected or appointed public leaders who are joining us tonight, as well as other leaders from across many sectors who are committed to developing conditions where we can all thrive. Tomorrow is Constitution Day, a commemoration of the signing of the United States Constitution on September 17, 1787. Through its principles and amendments, the Constitution establishes an aspirational framework through which the land of opportunity should theoretically be accessible for all Americans. But the realities of economic hardship hit close to home for us. Census data shows that over 14% of Greenville County children live below the poverty line, and many other families who earn above the poverty level are unable to afford basic needs. Despite these numbers, the universal desire for one's children to grow up with more opportunities than their parents remains strong. It drives families to dream, to hope, and to work tirelessly with this goal in mind. How can economic success fall within reach for every child and family? And what conditions are needed to make the American dream an achievable goal today? After examining these crucial questions through the lens of education and work in Straight Talk sessions 1 and 2, we'll look at them tonight through the lens of where we live. Through tonight's keynote presentation, Dr. Raj Chetty will discuss what data reveals about how a person's place, their zip code, neighborhood, street address, influences their economic opportunities. Dr. Chetty will shed light on proven community-level strategies that bring the American dream within closer reach for people across our nation. After Dr. Chetty's presentation, Upstate leaders will join him in an onstage conversation to discuss what opportunities exist for implementing economic mobility solutions right here in Greenville. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Gage Weeks, our president and CEO at Hollingsworth Funds, a foundation that envisions a vibrant, just, and inclusive Greenville, where equitable opportunities exist for all to thrive and advance. I'm proud to be part of Hollingsworth Fund's visionary philanthropy and grateful for their unwavering commitment to Furman and to the Greenville community for the past 25 years. Hollingsworth Funds is the partnering sponsor for tonight's program. Gage and the Hollingsworth staff have been thought partners for this session and its surrounding events, alongside other community partners who are committed to seeking solutions for economic mobility. And we're also grateful to several of Furman's academic departments, centers, and institutes for supporting this year's Straight Talk series. To move us forward, it is my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Dr. Raj Chetty is the William A. Ackman Professor of Economics at Harvard University and the Director of Opportunity Insights, an organization which uses big data to study the science of economic opportunity and supports communities in developing economic mobility solutions. Dr. Chetty has received numerous awards for his research, including a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. His work on economic mobility topics has been widely cited in academia, media outlets, and congressional testimony. Cities and metropolitan areas have used his research to identify local barriers and advance scalable solutions for people to rise out of poverty and achieve better life outcomes. Dr. Chetty, it is my honor to welcome you to Furman and to Greenville.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDade, for the very kind introduction. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you here this evening. So I'm going to talk this evening about what we can do to improve economic opportunity at a local level through our institutions in the local communities at a very microscopic level. But I want to start at a much bigger picture level by talking about the American dream, which is, of course, a multifaceted concept that has different meanings to different people. I want to distill it in this first chart here to one cornerstone aspect of the American dream, the idea that this is a country where through hard work, any child has the chance to move up in the income distribution relative to their parents. So in a paper my colleagues and I wrote a few years ago, we set about to assess the extent to which America actually lives up to that aspiration, measuring the fraction of children who go on to earn more than their parents did, measuring both kids' and parents' incomes in their mid-30s and adjusting for inflation. And in this chart here, we're looking at that data by the year in which the child was born. So if you look all the way over to the far left, you see that for kids born in the middle of the last century, back in 1940, it was a virtual guarantee that you were going to achieve the American dream of moving up. We estimate that 92% of children born in 1940 went on to earn more than their parents did. But if you look at what has happened over time, you can see that there's been a dramatic fading of the American dream, such that for children born in the middle of the 1980s, or in their mid-30s now when we're measuring their incomes as adults, it's become essentially a coin flip, a 50-50 shot as to whether you're going to do better than your parents. So this dramatic trend of the fading American dream is, of course, of fundamental interest to economists like myself because it reflects a major change in the US economy that we would like to understand. But I would argue that it's also a fundamental social and political interest because it's this very trend that underlies a lot of the frustration that people around the United States are expressing, that this is no longer a country where it's easy to get ahead, even through hard work. And that's manifested in recent election outcomes and various other events that I think we've all witnessed. So motivated by this trend, in the research group that I direct at Harvard Opportunity Insights, we are focused on the big picture question of what is driving the fading of the American dream, and what can we more importantly do to restore the American dream and create better opportunities for everyone to rise up going forward. Now, we are by no means the first group of scholars or people interested in economic policy to ask these questions. People have been studying issues of economic opportunity for more than a century. Our angle on it, as was mentioned in the introduction, is to use the tools of modern big data to study these questions with unprecedented precision. Much as you all hear about the use of large-scale data sets by companies like Amazon and Google to improve the products they offer, our vision is that such data can be used to better understand some of the key economic and social policy questions of our time. And so, to give you a sense of what that looks like, let me start by showing you a first set of data that gives us a finer-grained picture of economic opportunity in America, which is this map here, which shows you the geography of opportunity in the United States. So let me first take a minute to describe how we construct this map, and then tell you what I think we learned from it. So what we've done here is taken data on 20 million children, essentially all children born in the United States in the early 1980s. We obtain information from anonymized tax returns that allows us to link those children back to their parents and back to the exact location in which they grew up. We then divide the United States into 740 different metro and rural areas, and in each of those areas, we calculate a simple measure of upward income mobility. We ask, suppose you grew up in a family that is making $27,000 a year, which puts you at the 25th percentile of the US national income distribution. If we follow you over time and measure your own income from your 1040 income tax return when you file it when you're about 35 years old, how much are you making on average? So to give you an example, in the Boston metro area where I'm from, kids growing up in families making $27,000 a year, on average, when we look at their tax filings, they're making about $37,000 a year in their mid-30s. So you can similarly construct that statistic for every different metro and rural area in the United States. And we've colored this map so that the red-orange colors represent places where people are less likely to rise up and achieve the American dream. And the blue-green colors are places where people are more likely to rise up. So to look at some statistics, of interest, you can look at the broad regional patterns for yourself. The first point to notice, if you look at the lower right-hand side of the map, is that there's a tremendous amount of variation in children's chances of rising up in different parts of America. So behind that national chart that I showed you on the first slide, there's a tremendous amount of variation in America in people's chances of rising up. There are some parts of the country, for example, Dubuque, Iowa, or much of the rural Midwest, where kids growing up in families making $27,000 a year, one generation later are making $45,000 or even $50,000 a year, so quite a bit of upward mobility in a single generation. Yet there are other parts of America, like much of the Southeast and Greenville in particular, where you look at a kid growing up in a family making $27,000 a year, one generation later in their mid-30s, they are making the same amount or even a bit less than their parents were on average, which of course is quite troubling, and I think is especially surprising given the amount of growth that's occurring here in Greenville, more generally in the Southeast. It suggests that those high rates of growth are not translating necessarily to better opportunities for kids growing up in low-income families in these areas. So here in Greenville, you can see, it's in one of the darkest red colors. When we first did this analysis, Greenville and some other cities like Charlotte, North Carolina, here in the Southeast, turn out to be among the places in America where it's hardest to rise out of poverty. Things have improved a bit over the past 10, 15 years in Greenville in particular, when we look at the data in more recent years, but it remains, unfortunately, one of the places where it's hardest to rise out of poverty. And before I move on to talk about that point in more detail and what might be driving it, let me mention two additional points that I think are important in interpreting that fact. So for some of you, that may seem dissonant. Greenville has been having a number of interesting conversations with your colleagues, is a place that's growing very rapidly. Cities developing, it seems like it's doing very well. How is that consistent with these data, which seem to suggest it's one of the hardest places to rise up? So the way I think about it is, if you think about growth rates, the number of high-paying jobs, average incomes of people living here, how is it possible that a place like Greenville or a place like Charlotte, where our team has spent a lot of time as well, how can they be growing so rapidly, yet we're seeing in these data that kids growing up in low-income families are not having their incomes go up? How does that even add up arithmetically? So the way I think about it is that basically these cities are effectively importing talent. Lots of people are moving to cities like Greenville and Charlotte to get high-paying jobs. But that's not necessarily translating, as we're seeing in these new data where we follow kids over time, it's not translating into better outcomes for the kids growing up in low-income families in these communities. So that shows us that we need to do something more deliberate. Having good jobs, high-paying jobs is obviously very valuable for economic mobility, but we need to do more to connect people to those opportunities in local communities. The second key point I want to make is this is focused, and throughout the presentation I'm going to focus on kids growing up in low-income families. It turns out you can look at the same sort of data for kids growing up in high-income families, and you will find that people growing up in Greenville, much of the Southeast, you have very good outcomes, very similar to much of the rest of the country if you're growing up in a high-income family. And so those experiences can look very different. I'm going to concentrate here on how we can expand opportunities in particular for people who may be left behind, who are not benefiting from the opportunities that are emerging in these areas. So in this big map, your eye naturally gravitates to the broad regional variation, the Southeast versus the Midwest, certain cities in the industrial Midwest that seem to have lower levels of economic mobility. But it turns out that the variation in economic mobility that we see actually emerges at a much finer grained level. And so in order to show you that, what I'm going to do next is toggle over to a tool called the Opportunity Atlas, which you yourself can go to. It's this website that I've pulled up here, opportunityatlas.org. This initial view of this website shows you the same national map that I just started out with. Now, the way this website works is you can type in any address you'd like. You can type in your home address if you want. I'm just going to type in Greenville, South Carolina. And what we're going to do is literally zoom in now and look at these data at a much finer level, right here in the Greenville metro area, where now we're looking at the same statistics on upward mobility, not at the county level, but rather neighborhood by neighborhood within Greenville. So we've divided up the United States into 70,000 different census tracts. Each census tract has about 4,000 people in it. So think of it as, really a small definition of a neighborhood. You all know the neighborhoods here in your city better than I do, but you can see that even in Greenville, much of it, as I've been emphasizing, unfortunately, is pretty low mobility. There are lots of places with very low outcomes here where kids growing up in poor families don't have great chances of rising up. But even in Greenville, there are areas where you have significantly higher rates of upward mobility. And more generally, in very nearby areas, you have much higher rates of upward mobility. So we see this pattern in Greenville. You can look at other cities in America. You will consistently see this kind of checkerboard pattern where the differences in economic mobility are emerging at a hyper-local level. It's not about differences between states or differences between one city versus another. Often it's about differences that are emerging on one side of the street versus another side of the street, which should start to give you, maybe a sense of what might be going on here. It may be starting to trigger what is driving this variation, what are the explanations for why we're seeing these sharp differences in economic opportunity. It has to be something emerging at a very local level. And so motivated by these basic facts on what economic opportunity looks like in the US as a whole, in Greenville in particular, what I want to do now in the remainder of the presentation is show you how we can use these kinds of very fine-grained data to understand the science of economic opportunity, to understand why it is that kids' outcomes look so different in the Midwest versus the Southeast, or in one neighborhood in Greenville versus another. It gives us a new microscope, if you will, to study these questions that's been enormously productive for social scientists. And then building on that knowledge, in the second half of the presentation, I want to transition to how we can use these scientific understandings to make concrete changes in terms of economic policy, in terms of what we're doing in local communities, to increase economic mobility and make our society have better opportunities for everyone and make it more productive. So with that structure, I'm going to go back to the slides here and talk about next the determinants of economic mobility, the science of economic opportunity. So to do that, let me again now zoom into the map of Greenville that I just showed you a second ago on the website and hone in on two particular neighborhoods, Alta Vista and Pleasant Valley, which are two neighborhoods here in Greenville that have quite different levels of economic mobility. You can see that kids growing up in Alta Vista have significantly higher chances of rising up than kids growing up in Pleasant Valley. So I'm focusing on those two examples because I want to use that to set up now a next exercise to start to understand the determinants of economic mobility, where we analyzed about 5 million families that moved across neighborhoods in order to understand better what is driving these differences in children's outcomes across areas. Now, rather than getting into the statistical details of that study, what I'm going to do is summarize what we found in the context of this simple example of thinking about a family that moves from Pleasant Valley to Alta Vista with kids of different ages. Okay, so what we see in the data is if you grew up from birth in Pleasant Valley in a low-income family, on average, when we look at your tax filings, you're making about $23,000 a year. In contrast, kids growing up in families at the exact same income level from birth in Alta Vista, they're making about $31,000 a year. So now what I want you to do is think about a family that moves from Pleasant Valley to Alta Vista when their child is exactly 2 years old. So what we do in our data is track that child over 30 years and measure that child's income when they're in their mid-30s. And what we see in that first dot that you see plotted there is, on average, those children who move when they're exactly 2 from Pleasant Valley to Alta Vista, they're making about $30,200 a year. Okay, so that's for kids who make this move when they're exactly 2. Now let's repeat this analysis for kids who make the same exact move when they are 3, 4, 5, and so on. What do you see? You see this very clear declining pattern. The later you move from Pleasant Valley to Alta Vista, or more generally, the later you move from a red-colored part of the maps that I've been showing you to a blue-green colored part, the less of a gain you get. And if you move after you're in your early or mid-20s, you get no gain at all, and the relationship becomes completely flat. So what do you see from this chart? I think there are three key lessons. The first is that where you grow up really matters. It's not just that the types of kids growing up in Greenville are different from the types of kids growing up in Iowa, or the kids growing up in Pleasant Valley are different from those living in Alta Vista. No, apparently if you take a given kid and move that kid from one neighborhood to another, you can see a really meaningful change in their life outcomes. Here in the context of income, but in other analyses we've done in the context of levels of education, in health, in rates of incarceration, and a broad variety of outcomes that we might be interested in. I view that simple result as very encouraging because it suggests that we don't need to look back to the 1950s or look back to a completely different system to find places with higher levels of upward mobility. You can actually look just a few miles down the road in your own community and find the answer there. That suggests that these problems are really changeable, that we can actually do something about these challenging issues. The second thing that you see is that what really matters for economic mobility is where you grow up, not where you live as an adult. So childhood environment seems really central here. We see in this and other analyses that when adults move to different neighborhoods, you don't see significant changes in their economic outcomes. And the third thing you see is that there's sort of a dosage effect here, to make a medical analogy. Every extra year that you spend growing up in one of those higher opportunity neighborhoods, the better you do as an adult. If you move there at age 5 instead of 10, or 10 instead of 15, it cumulates to a better and better outcome. So childhood environment matters throughout childhood, not just in the very earliest years, as some people have emphasized in recent work, but rather, from birth to early adulthood. And so we need to think about how we can cultivate better environments throughout that period. So naturally, the next question that you probably have in your mind, having established that where you grow up matters, that local environment matters, is what is it that a place like Alta Vista is doing that is producing better outcomes for kids than the red-colored parts of the maps that I've been showing you, where we're seeing poorer opportunities to rise up. So we and many other scholars have been studying these questions over the past decade using the data that our team has put out in the Opportunity Atlas. Numerous papers have been written about what predicts these differences in economic outcomes across areas. I'm going to summarize here, in the interest of time, the 4 strongest patterns that people have found. The first is that places that have higher levels of upward mobility tend to be places with lower poverty rates. So when you have concentrated poverty, where you don't have mixed income communities, those tend to be places with lower levels of upward mobility. A second strong pattern you see in the data is places with more stable family structures, more two-parent families in particular, tend to have higher rates of upward mobility. A third pattern you see is that places with better schools, both at the K through 12 level and in terms of access to high quality higher education, tend to have higher levels of upward mobility, as you might expect intuitively. And finally, we see that places with greater social capital tend to have higher levels of upward mobility. So this idea of social capital is something that has been widely discussed for more than 100 years in public policy discussions, in the academic literature, but it's been kind of fuzzy what exactly people mean by it. So social capital in the past has been used to mean things like the strength of your network, how strong your community is, trust in a community, things like that. And people have had the sense that those kinds of factors might matter for outcomes like economic mobility, but it's been difficult to pin down exactly what it is that matters and how we might change it. Now, this is another place where modern large-scale data have helped us make progress in understanding these issues. And I want to spend a minute going deeper into that factor, both because it illustrates new ideas that I think are really important, and because, as you'll see in a second, I actually think this social capital factor may be the most important of the 4 that are listed here. So the way our team analyzed social capital empirically in the data was to take advantage of modern social network data, which gives us an unprecedented way to study how people are connecting with each other. And so in particular, we set up a partnership with Meta, the company that operates the Facebook platform, in order to analyze connections between people on Facebook, studying 72 million people who had billions of friendships between them. And using that data, we construct this map shown on the right here, which I'll again take a second to describe. So just to set the stage, the map on the left is the same map of upward mobility constructed using tax records that I showed you from the outset. And the map on the right is a very different map. It's a map constructed using Facebook data, where we're constructing a measure of social capital that we call economic connectedness. So what this term means is, it's a very simple concept. It measures the extent to which low-income people are connecting with or interacting with high-income people in a given community. The way we define it is we take the set of people who have below median income on Facebook, and we ask what fraction of their friends have above median income. So among low-income folks, what fraction of their Facebook friends have high income? In the map on the right, the red colors are places that are more disconnected by class, where low-income people do not have many high-income friends, and the blue-green colors are places where there's more cross-class interaction. Now, you can see the result here immediately for yourself. You don't need any fancy statistics. It's immediately obvious that the map on the right looks incredibly similar to the map on the left. It's exactly in the places in America where low-income people are more connected to high-income people that they're also more likely to rise up and achieve the American dream. So places like the rural Midwest, for example, are places with a lot of cross-class interaction and a lot of upward mobility. Unfortunately, if you look at Greenville, it's a place with a lot of disconnection across class lines, where low-income people, if we look at the social network data, tend not to be connected to high-income people. And again, you can look up that data yourself online. Now, this factor of economic connectedness turns out to be the single strongest predictor of economic mobility that we or anyone else has identified to date. And in my view, based on more recent ongoing work we're doing, changing economic connectedness can really have significant impacts on people's chances of rising up. What exact mechanism is driving that, we don't quite know yet, but I think there are many plausible channels through which it could matter. It could be that you get a job referral from lots of people in the US get jobs through referrals. If you're connected to more folks who have high-paying jobs, you're more likely to get that referral that will open up a pathway for you. I think at a deeper level, it could be about kids' aspirations and what types of careers they even think about pursuing. If you've never met anybody who's gone to college or become a scientist or gone into business, maybe that path is not even on your radar screen. If you have these kinds of cross-class interactions, it changes the trajectory you pursue. Whatever the underlying mechanism is, my sense is this is a key area we need to focus on, among the other factors that I also mentioned earlier, the quality of schools, access to higher education, and so forth. And so with that quick overview of some of the key research findings we've obtained on the drivers of economic mobility, what I want to do in the remaining time is talk about how we can take that knowledge to actually take action on the ground to increase economic mobility going forward. And the way I'm going to organize this discussion is by focusing on three key areas that I think emerge as natural areas to focus on to increase economic mobility in light of the data that I've just shown you. So to summarize in a nutshell, what I think we've learned about the science of economic opportunity, it's that the origins of differences in economic mobility are hyper-local. It's about the exact neighborhood and environment in which you grow up, the school you attend, and so on, the social connections you have, from birth to something like early adulthood. If you had that view of the world, I think you would naturally think about three different ways to increase economic mobility going forward. The first is to reduce segregation. If it's the case, as it is, that a few miles down the road in Greenville, families can have much better chances of rising out of poverty, well, maybe we can help more families move to those higher opportunity areas using housing vouchers or other sorts of policy tools. And so that is one concrete approach that I'll spend some time talking about. Now, the moving to opportunity approach, I think, is an attractive and concrete one that, as I'll show you in a second, really can have some promise. But it, of course, has limits to scale. You can't move everybody, and not everyone wants to move to a different neighborhood. So that brings us to the second approach listed here of place-based investment. The way I think about that is rather than bringing people to opportunity, how do we bring opportunity to people where they currently live? How do we take the red-colored parts of the maps that I've been showing you and turn them into green colors. And so I'll spend a bit of time talking about promising approaches there. And then finally, after age 18, the key touch point for most kids is not the home in which they live, but rather the institution of higher education that they might attend. And I think that there's a lot that we can do in our higher education and workforce training systems to increase their impacts on economic mobility. And so I'll spend a bit of time talking about that. So let me start with the reducing segregation approach and go back to the map of Greenville, but now overlay in the black dots the most common places where people receiving housing vouchers from the federal government currently live. So just as a bit of institutional context for those who may not be familiar, in the United States, we spend about $60 billion a year on affordable housing programs, the largest component of which are housing choice vouchers, which are essentially rental assistance given to about 2.5 million families to help them find housing in more stable areas and better neighborhoods with the intention of helping them rise out of poverty. So there are many such families that receive housing vouchers from the federal government here in Greenville. And we're just showing in those black dots where those families tend to live. And you might notice a puzzling pattern, which is despite the fact that these families are receiving a substantial amount, hundreds of dollars a month, of assistance from the federal government for paying their rent, they are concentrated in the red-colored parts of this map, not the blue-green colored parts of the map, whereas I just showed you earlier, their kids are much more likely to have a chance of rising out of poverty. This is a pattern that we see not just in Greenville, but actually universally across the United States. I'll give you another example, literally on the other end of the country, here in Seattle, where our team has done some work. And you can see exactly the same pattern in Seattle. If you look at where housing voucher holders are living, it's concentrated in the low opportunity, not the high opportunity neighborhoods in Seattle. So this may be puzzling to you. We are spending billions of dollars on this program that's supposed to give families access to housing in better neighborhoods, yet that's not happening. Why are they not moving to these higher opportunity areas? You know, is it because they don't want to? Maybe they want to stay close to families, stay close to jobs, or is there something else that's preventing them from moving to higher opportunity areas? So to give you a sense of how modern data and scientific analysis can help us better design these policies and move towards, solutions that could be implemented here in Greenville itself, I'm going to talk about an experiment we did in Seattle in collaboration with the local housing authority called the Creating Moves to Opportunity Experiment, where what we did was took 1,000 families that came in to apply for a housing voucher through the standard process, divided them by the flip of a coin into two groups. 500 of them received the standard voucher and were told, you have 4 months to go find housing wherever you want to live without any additional support. The other 500 in the treatment group received essentially what I think of as a social support or a social capital intervention, where they were connected to a counselor who would help them find housing in a high opportunity area if they wanted to move there. Those counselors connected them to landlords, helped them negotiate with landlords on their behalf. They provided a little bit of short-term financial assistance. If you needed to pay for an application fee or a security deposit, they would provide that money to you. And so what we did is ran this like an experiment. Half the families got this additional assistance, half of them didn't, followed them over time, and look at where they ended up living. And the results are shown here. In the control group shown in the gray, only 14% of families moved to one of these high opportunity neighborhoods, the green-colored neighborhoods in the map of Seattle I just showed you. In the treatment group, that number jumps up to 54%. More than half of the families are now living in high opportunity areas. In some sense, we've now started to desegregate the city with this intervention. Now, in thinking about the magnitudes of this effect, I think two numbers are important to keep in mind. First, the cost of this intervention, of this social capital support, as I put it, is about $2,500 a family. So that's not a small number, but it is a small number when you compare it to the benefits that emerge from this intervention. We estimate, based on our prior work, that the kids who got lucky and end up in that blue bar there, who got access to those additional services, moved to one of those high opportunity neighborhoods, they're going to earn about $200,000 more over their lifetimes than the kids who were in the control group. So that little bit of extra spending to make these vouchers more effective in helping families move to opportunity has an enormous social return. And it's the type of policy that I think we should be thinking about to make our affordable housing system more effective. So this sort of evidence, what I've been heartened by is useful not just from a scientific understanding perspective, but actually has an impact on policy. After we did that work in Seattle, there was a bill passed in Congress authorizing, with bipartisan sponsors, about $80 million to replicate what we did in Seattle in 8 other cities across America, the same kind of experimental framework to evaluate whether what we did in Seattle would scale across the country. And you can see here, in cities across the country, like Nashville, New Orleans, and so on, they did the same kind of approach. And what you end up finding, the data were just released by an independent team of evaluators a few months ago, that this approach increased the fraction of families who moved to high opportunity areas quite substantially in all of these other cities as well. There's since been another bill proposed in Congress to expand the housing voucher program by $5 billion per year, expand these sorts of social supports. And I think if at some point, again, because it has bipartisan sponsors, at some point might be passed, that will expand opportunities for lots of kids across the United States. So that gives you one concrete example of the types of policies that we can implement using modern data to expand opportunity for our kids. But as I was emphasizing earlier, it's by no means the only policy that we should focus on. It has limits to scale. Clearly we need to think about other solutions as well. And so I now want to turn to the second bucket of place-based investment and give you a sense of what we can do there concretely. So here I'm going to talk about one particular program, which I think is the biggest effort by the federal government to try to make place-based investments to bring opportunity to specific places, called the Hope 6 Neighborhood Revitalization Program. So this is a program on which we spent about $17 billion over 20 years or so. And essentially what this program did was take high-poverty public housing projects, I'll give you an illustration here from nearby Winston-Salem called Happy Hill Gardens, and they spent money to demolish those public housing projects and build mixed-income housing and introduce some new programs and so forth, as shown by the picture on the right, which has been transformed through this investment. So we have not known up to this point whether these kinds of investments actually make any difference in bringing opportunity to a given neighborhood. In a paper our team will release in a few weeks, we have been analyzing this program using the same large-scale longitudinal data from tax and census records. And just to summarize in a nutshell what we find there, what we're doing here is an analysis of kids' outcomes around the point at which one of these housing projects is revitalized. So just to make this very concrete, if you look at that first dot there at -10, what that's doing is looking at the set of kids who grew up in one of these Hope 6 revitalized projects 10 years before they were ultimately revitalized. And we're following those kids over time, measuring how much they earn as adults, and we see that those children are earning about $25,000 a year when they grow up. We then do the same thing for the kids who were living there 9 years before revitalization, 8 years before revitalization, and you can see it looks like basically a flat line. Nothing is changing, right? Now, do the same analysis after revitalization, and you can see this dramatic improvement in kids' outcomes after these neighborhoods have been revitalized, showing that it is, in fact, possible to bring opportunity to people in a given place. We then do further analysis, which I'll skip in the interest of time, to try to understand what is it that's driving this big improvement in outcomes that we're seeing in this chart. And we find, once again, that it's all about increased social interaction. So we find that the kids living in these revitalized public housing projects, when we look at who they're friends with or who they're spending time with using data on mobile phones where you can see where people are spending their time, you find that there's more interaction with people in surrounding communities. And when those surrounding communities have thriving institutions, good schools, and so on, we see a dramatic impact in these public housing projects. So essentially, it's like there were these islands that were isolated from the surrounding communities. Once you revitalize them, rates of crimes fall, rates of interaction increase, you see a dramatic improvement in outcomes. Again, underscoring the importance of that social capital cross-class interaction mechanism I've been stressing. I want to now spend in the last couple of minutes here a moment discussing the final and third bucket of higher education and workforce training, where once again, I think we can use modern data and analysis to be more effective in what colleges and workforce training programs are doing to increase economic mobility. And so to set the stage there, I want to first again show you some descriptive data on how colleges contribute to economic mobility in the United States. So just like our team has constructed statistics on how economic mobility varies across neighborhoods in America, we have similarly constructed publicly available statistics on how each college's contribution to economic mobility varies in the United States. And these data, once again, are publicly accessible. You can go to a nice website developed by the New York Times, type in Furman or type in any university you're interested in, and you can pull up the numbers that I'm showing you here. So the way this chart represents those data is by looking at two dimensions that determine how much a college contributes to economic mobility. The vertical axis is what you may think of as the upward mobility rate. So what this is asking is, among the set of low-income students on campus, students from the bottom 20% of the income distribution, what fraction of them reach the top 20% of the income distribution? So you can see my own institution, Harvard, or places like MIT and Stanford, they excel on that dimension. Lots of low-income kids who come to those colleges end up doing very well, reaching the upper middle class or beyond after they graduate. But there's a second dimension that matters critically for how much a college contributes to economic mobility. And that's what's on the horizontal axis, what we've labeled low-income access. This simply measures the fraction of the student body that comes from the bottom 20% of the income distribution, that comes from a low-income family. And you can see on this dimension, those same colleges I mentioned, the elite Ivy League institutions in the United States, they enrolled very few kids from the bottom 20% of the income distribution. Only 3% of kids at Harvard come from the bottom 20%. And so what that means mechanically is that it is impossible for those institutions to be contributing a whole lot to economic mobility, because if you don't have many low-income kids on campus, obviously you can't be helping a lot of low-income people rise up. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you can see that there are a number of two-year institutions, predominantly community colleges, that are serving many low-income kids. But unfortunately, when you look at their outcomes, those dots are not very high on the chart. So they are serving many low-income kids, but when we look at their outcomes after college, we don't see many of them rising up. Now, we've labeled colleges in the South Carolina area here, so you can see Furman on the upper left side. You can see other colleges, like state colleges and then county community college on the lower right side. But the general pattern you see here in South Carolina echoes a pattern we see more broadly in the United States, where each college is represented by one dot, which is that there's sort of a downward sloping pattern here, right? There are basically no dots in the upper right side of this chart, which in my view is essentially the fundamental problem in the US higher education system in terms of promoting economic mobility. We have essentially no institutions in this country that both enroll a lot of low-income kids and help them reach the upper middle class. And that limits the capacity of our higher education system to promote economic mobility. Now, there are a handful of exceptions to this. Let me highlight one of them. This dot up here in the upper right, what is that? It's a place called the Vaughn College of Aeronautics and Technology. That is a small college in Queens, New York, that does exactly what you think it would, based on its name. It trains people in careers in aeronautics and technology. It turns out to be a career that pays pretty well, and lots of kids from lower income backgrounds are able to attend that institution and end up getting pretty high-paying jobs. Now, why do I highlight that college? It illustrates what I think is a broader point, which is that targeted vocational education that gets you a job in certain high-paying sectors can be a really meaningful path to upward mobility in the US. And so in the last couple of minutes here, I just want to give you a concrete example of what those programs can look like. Here's one example of that, a program called Year Up, which is a sectoral job training program that gives you technical skills in a particular industry, could be in IT, could be in financial operations, importantly pairs that with a connection to an employer, an internship, a career pathway, essentially a social capital sort of wraparound support. And I know we'll hear from our panelists on similar programs with Michelin and others here in South Carolina that I think could be very promising. But just to show you the data on how this kind of thing can really make a difference, this program has been evaluated in a randomized trial where some people got access to the program in 2014, Other people, shown in the orange, serve as a control group by the flip of a coin, did not get access to the program. Before they were in the program, the earnings of the two groups track each other perfectly. When people are participating in the job training program, their earnings dip. But then remarkably afterward, you can see that there's about a $9,000 a year earnings gain that is sustained in the years afterward as a result of participating in this very short-term job training program. So an incredibly high rate of return, once again, showing that we can make really meaningful changes in this context as well. So final point, one perspective on these issues of economic opportunity that I think matters, brings a lot of us to the table, is that we should be interested in expanding opportunity because that's what the American ideal is about. Everyone should have a fair shot of the American dream. But I think it's very important to recognize that there is another reason to be interested in these issues, which has nothing to do with fairness or justice, which simply has to do with increasing economic growth and increasing the productivity of your local economy here in Greenville. And so to show you that, to make that point, I'm going to turn to a different and final set of data where we've linked the universe of patent records to the tax data that I've been showing you throughout this talk to look at who goes on to become an inventor in America. And what you can see here is we're plotting your chances of becoming an inventor versus your parents' income. You can see that if you happen to be born to parents in the top 1% of the income distribution, you're 10 times more likely to become an inventor than if you happen to be born to lower income parents. Now, when we dig in further to ask why that is, it turns out to be because of the same factors I've been emphasizing: who you're exposed to, who you're connected to, what your childhood environment looks like, and so on. The reason I think this is so important is that it suggests that addressing these issues will not just help these kids rise up, but will more generally help all of us by leading to more innovation, more new businesses, new drugs, new technologies that could benefit the economy, benefit society more broadly. And the magnitude of this problem is quite substantial. We estimate that there are a very large number of what you might call lost Einsteins in our society. There are lots of kids in those neighborhoods in Greenville that I was showing you earlier who could go on to become inventors if they had access to the same opportunities as other groups. There's quite a substantial magnitude of gain to be had by addressing these problems, just purely from an economic growth perspective. So to conclude, I think there's tremendous importance in addressing these issues of economic opportunity. There are challenges currently here in Greenville, but I think there's also a path forward. We have found in other cities where our team has done work, given a talk like this, sometimes then leading to subsequent collaboration. I mentioned the example of nearby Charlotte, North Carolina, and I know there are folks here from groups there that have been leading this work, where first recognizing that Charlotte had low levels of economic mobility, then led to a series of partnerships in the city from corporate leaders like Bank of America, from the city, from the local commissions that were set up to really invest in a coherent way in increasing economic opportunity there. I think that's had quite a significant impact in that city. Similar initiatives in Philadelphia and other places that we're seeing around the country. And I very much hope that something similar can be done here in Greenville, taking advantage of the great growth and opportunities that are already here. So thanks so much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chetty, for sharing your latest research on economic mobility and some of the solutions you've identified for helping people get ahead in our community. While Greenville is still, growing and we see a lot of great things, we know that obviously we still have a long way to go. So excited to talk about how we do that here this evening. At Hollingsworth Funds, we believe that when those most in need participate and contribute fully to the economic and cultural vibrancy of our community, we all benefit, right? And so with the brief time that we've got left this evening, we wanted to focus on some local solutions to those three policy approaches that Dr. Chetty identified tonight, and maybe some of the opportunities and challenges for success around that. So I'd like to welcome Terrell Bates, CEO of the Greenville Housing Authority, Shannon Lavrin, Greenville City Manager, and Tiffany Thompson-Davis, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Michelin North America. Many thanks to all three of you for being here, and to Dr. Chetty, who'll share some of his thoughts on panelist reflections. So we're going to start with the first policy approach of helping low-income families move to higher opportunity neighborhoods, and the role that public housing authorities and housing choice vouchers can play in that. So Terrell, would love to give you just a chance to reflect on that approach, maybe give us a view into some of the families that you're serving, and tell us a little bit more about your Moving to Work initiative.
Thank you, Gage. Well, the Greenville Housing Authority serves approximately 3,200 households in Greenville, and that translates to thousands of people, about 10,000 people. We administer nearly $30 million in federal funds that are paid to private and corporate property owners in Greenville on behalf of low-income households. Today's challenges involve things like very competitive market rate rents, and believe it or not, $30 million is a lot of money, but it's not enough subsidy for the number of people in Greenville that really need help in supporting their families in affording rent in units that are safe, decent, and sanitary, and lead to the kind of outcomes that Dr. Cherry talked about. So TGHA, or the Housing Authority, has adopted what we call small area fair market rents, which permit us to pay a little bit higher rents in what are classified as opportunity neighborhoods, and that's something just started in the past couple of years. We'll be working and tracking data and reporting how the benefits that families receive in these opportunity areas impact our community. Participating families may elect to move to areas where there could be improved services like transportation, schools, daycare, even food. Other challenges involve educational, financial, and social equity, which Dr. Cherry pointed out, and that exists here as well. Not everyone is born into families who provide generational assets or social capital. It's a void in our community. There are stigmas around poverty. It's easy to dismiss portions of our population who may not be doing well financially because we kind of think about those people. What we don't often recognize, especially in a city like Greenville, is the majority of persons that are in poverty here and those serviced by the Housing Authority are born here. They're born here, or they're from local neighboring communities. They didn't take a transfer bus to get here. Like they live here, they belong here. And if sometime this week you stopped in for like a cup of coffee, or you've popped into a local convenience store, or you've grabbed lunch at a fast food place, you have dropped children off at a bus stop or daycare center, or visited a local hospital or hotel or other public buildings, it's very likely that you've run into a lot of our participants. They provide service level jobs in this community for us. In Sunday morning traffic, you're very likely to be driving in a lane next to someone coming from a worship service whose benefits and prayers may be very similar to yours. In 2025, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development approved the Housing Authority's Move to Work initiative. This initiative provides term-limited assistance to families making a commitment to self-sufficiency and ultimately improving their economic opportunities through education and improved employment. The average wage of participants in our program currently is somewhere between $9 and $17 per hour. To rent a modest two-bedroom apartment in Greenville, you need to be making $29 to $33 an hour. So they're far away from just a modest, not an extravagant type housing, but just modest housing that's safe and decent in Greenville. Most are only working full-time by aggregating 2 or more jobs. So most of the jobs they have are low wage and part-time, which means also that they may not have things like medical benefits or paid time off, or other benefits commonly associated with full-time employment. Food insecurity is often a challenge, with many households relying on supplemental food from pantry and other sources. transportation to be able to have access to healthy foods is also a challenge. Like there are healthy foods available at the farmer's market on Main Street, but you have to have a way to get there. And you have to be able to get there at a certain time, at a certain day. And same thing with some of the grocery outlets that provide better food options that are affordable for families. After school and summer, while welcomed by children, often provide complex issues for these families. They're often unable to provide quality childcare and recreation, and things, again, to Dr. Chetty's point, like camps, sports, and other activities that we just take for granted are often not available for children living in poverty. Lack of access or awareness of credit management causes a lot of our participants to rely on predatory lending organizations. Something as simply easy as cashing a check becomes a huge problem for them. They're paying enormous amounts of money to cash a payroll check, or, goodness, if there is a situation that involves an emergency, a medical emergency, a vehicle maintenance, a funeral, they get these outrageous loans that it takes years and years to kind of get back on check. So an MTW, or Moving to Work participant, really just recently described waking up daily to a feeling of hopelessness. The continual onslaught of daily problems sometimes create medical situations such as depression and other kinds of emotional or mental health issues. So the program, the MTW program, seeks to provide hope, opportunity, and positive change to households receiving rental assistance through connections with providers of education, which Dr. Chetty mentioned, job skills, which he also mentioned, credit and financial courses, and then, of course, more access to social activities and social inclusion. So the program is mandatory for all of our non-elderly, non-disabled households. And this is an enormous undertaking that could not be imagined without the support of literally dozens of others working together with the Housing Authority, our nonprofit partners, and foundations that do provide support for this program. So nearly 1,700 participant households will be a part of this program. They're the parents of children who will become the leaders of Greenville in the next generation. They're the workers who provide critical services that support our families and businesses on a daily basis. And there are 1,700 life stories that in this 5 minutes I could not begin to tell you what they all are, but I will say that we all, everyone in this room, has an opportunity at some level, at some time in your life, to give a thought, a contribution, a service that will help to lift these families. And again, in doing so, like Dr. Chetty pointed out just so well, we uplift ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol. And I really appreciate you kind of humanizing the issue as well. I think sometimes we focus a lot on the data and the science, and also have to remember that we're talking about real everyday people, behind those numbers. So I really appreciate that. Dr. Chetty, in 1 or 2 minutes here, just curious about any advice you might have for Terrell with respect to the Moving to Work program, and or any other additional insight into other Moving to Opportunity programs that you've seen around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So, people may not be familiar with the jargon of moving to work, but basically it gives more flexibility to do innovative things with the housing voucher program, and so it's terrific that Greenville now has that status. The reason we were able to do the experimental pilot I described in Seattle is because they had moving to work status, which is what permitted that approach. And so, one thing I would suggest in this context, you saw the data for Greenville, people receiving housing vouchers. That support is important. It's helping them pay the rent. I don't want to minimize that. But I think we could do more to help those families move to the neighborhoods within Greenville that are really going to help their kids rise up in the next generation. I know that is high on your agenda, and I think we've seen that those relatively inexpensive additional supports, if we can find the funding to provide those additional supports, it could come from the MTW money itself, that can really make a difference, I think, in kids' lives. And so connecting people to those communities, in addition to just simply giving them the vouchers and wishing them the best. I know that's important to you, and I think that's an emphasis, that's a message that could really make a difference here in Greenville.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that's a focus, certainly with our partnership with Move to Work, is ensuring that you've got that kind of wraparound support and connections, along the way. Dr. Chetty, your research kind of clearly demonstrates how people can improve their prospects for upward economic mobility when their families are able to move to higher opportunity neighborhoods, right? But that doesn't necessarily address, as you said, those who are left behind. So, now want to kind of turn the focus a little bit more to the place-based investment side of things. And Shannon, through your work at the city, curious if you can just share some examples of, maybe how you all are investing in some of the under-resourced neighborhoods here in Greenville.
Thank you, Gage. Thank you, Dr. Chetty. Yes, we start with looking at going back to 2021. And in 2021, the city of Greenville adopted our Greenville 2040 plan. And that's important because that is our city's comprehensive plan, which serves as essentially our North Star that guides all of our priorities and policies for the city of Greenville. And some very significant things came out of our Greenville 2040 plan, which was the community's plan. The community came and told us what they wanted us to focus on. One was that we needed to really look at our zoning regulations and how zoning regulations impact affordable housing, but just housing in general across the board. They also told us that we need a new economic development strategic plan for the city of Greenville that really prioritized economic development with an emphasis on building entrepreneurship right here in Greenville. Because we know that if we can build entrepreneurs here in Greenville, that we can build that economic development success in the community. And the other thing that Greenville 2040 told us that was very significant was that we needed to do small area plans in our neighborhoods throughout the city. So since that time, that was in 2021, the city has adopted a new economic development strategic plan, which we did in 2022, which told us that we needed to go and create our own city economic development team, our own our own corporation that could really focus on economic mobility and entrepreneurship throughout the entire city of Greenville community. We also reformed our entire zoning code for the city, and in 2023, we adopted a brand new zoning code for all of Greenville, the entire community, which was a form-based code that also had incentives within the code for affordable housing in particular, trying to figure out how can we change our zoning regulations that would not inhibit the building of housing and most importantly, affordable housing in the city of Greenville. We also have done 3 small area plans of significance in our special emphasis neighborhoods, which are neighborhoods that traditionally were underrepresented in terms of economic mobility and financials. That would be our Greenlawn-Spartanburg neighborhood, our Haney-Serene neighborhood, and also our area around our downtown airport, which is adjacent to our Nicholtown neighborhood. Those small area plans really showed us that we have a community that wants social contact, as Dr. Chetty mentioned earlier. One of the things that I'm most proud of about some of those planning efforts were that we now have a strong relationship with those neighborhoods that we didn't have prior to those planning efforts. Those neighborhoods now have a connection to the city government, and just what we've been able to accomplish through those small area plans is really important. Now we have to implement those plans. So what are we going to do to implement those plans? To your question about investment. Well, last year we purchased $10.5 million worth of land in the Haney-Serene neighborhood, 6.5 acres. We're currently going to buy another 0.7 acres. And that is important because Haney-Serene is a special emphasis neighborhood that has a lot of vacant land adjacent to downtown. It's a wonderful area that provides a lot of opportunity for people to live there and for us to build mixed income housing in that neighborhood. We have opportunity to buy additional property in our Greenlawn-Spartanburg neighborhood, something that you're going to see and hear about probably very soon, because the city already owns a lot of land in Greenlawn-Spartanburg. So if we're able to buy additional land, put it together with our land, we can actually make some significant investments in our Greenlawn-Spartanburg neighborhood. We also have adopted what's known as our Neighborhood Infrastructure Bond. So in 2022, the city of Greenville put in place a $32 million neighborhood infrastructure bond, as well as a $3.5 million Section 108 loan against our community development funds, and a significant portion of those dollars are going into investments within our special emphasis neighborhood. To date, we've invested $7.135 million in sidewalk improvements alone in our special emphasis neighborhoods. That's since 2022. So those projects are either under construction or they have been completed. We also are investing in 3 of our neighborhood community centers within our special emphasis neighborhoods through our neighborhood infrastructure bond. Our Nicholtown neighborhood community center is currently undergoing a $5 million renovation. We are almost complete with a brand new community center in our southern side community. That will be completed before the end of the year. And we've put out to bid plans to rebuild our community center in our Viola neighborhood. And those are all significant investments because, as you heard from Dr. Chetty earlier, those neighborhood centers provide what we've talked about, social contact within those neighborhoods. It provides us, the city and the community, a way to constantly be in community with each other. We continue to also invest, obviously, in affordable housing. We support the Greenville Housing Fund, and I think that last year alone, we supported over $10 million worth of affordable housing projects here in the city of Greenville through land acquisition or through money to the Affordable Housing Fund, various forms and fashion. But remember, our budget is $150 million a year for our general operating budget, so that's a significant lift for us within the city of Greenville. So I'm very excited about some of what I think what our investments are within the city of Greenville. Obviously, I think that what I've heard tonight is we know we can do more, but I hope that you think we're on the right track, and I look forward to hearing some other things that you think we can do to supplement the investments that we've made to see continued improvement within the city.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. And just curious for your reactions to Shannon's comments, particularly around a lot of the investment around affordable housing for sure, but just other thoughts.
Yeah, so that was a terrific outline of the many different approaches it sounds like you all are taking to invest in some of the essentially red-colored communities that I was showing you in the maps, which is excellent. And as we saw in the Hope's example I gave you all, can really make a difference. One thing I would maybe suggest is thinking about these approaches in tandem. So I have heard from other places where people have invested in particular communities, really transformed them. And something I'm reminded of is Jeff Canada, who led the Harlem Children's Zone initiative, one of the most successful efforts to revitalize a community. Harlem, of course. He said something to me that stuck with me, which is, he said, in a way, I was a victim of my own success. The community became so successful, it's become so expensive, now it's gentrified, and the people I was seeking to help are no longer able to afford to live there. And so I think anticipating that and saying we need to, in tandem, think about how we're preserving affordable housing, which you touched upon, but it could involve housing vouchers, it could involve philanthropy, kind of thinking about these things together from the get-go, rather than saying, let's revitalize this community, make great things happen there, and then after the fact, figure out how we react to what happens. Maybe a useful way to think about things.
Yeah, and I think really well said. I mean, that's something we feel with our growth pressures without question, and I think a lot of, southern urbanizing communities are certainly feeling that, and, I feel like there's no kind of magic bullet to that, but I think that intentionality is critically important. So let's transition to the third policy approach that, speaks to the significant impact that education and workforce training opportunities can have on economic mobility outcomes. So Tiffany, love for you to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Greenville on that front. Maybe shed a little light on Michelin's apprenticeship and scholars program, and we'll see where we go from there.
Sure. So yes, Michelin has been in the community for over 50 years, celebrating 50 years in manufacturing last year and 50 years in R&D this year. And I couldn't agree more with you, Dr. Chetty, that we really have to think about this in terms of the ecosystem. How are we all working together? We are planted across South Carolina, and we couldn't do what we do without our people. And so the local talent pool is really important for us. And when we think about it, we need to make sure that we can both attract talent but retain talent. And when we say attract talent here, it's that local talent that really gives us our base. And so for Michelin, we're not only working with a lot of the schools that we saw on Dr. Chetty's map in terms of four-year universities, but we're also working with some of the community colleges and even high schools through our youth apprenticeship program, as well as our Tech Scholars program. And what those programs are focused on is pairing what students are learning in the classroom with hands-on experience. They're getting access to technical knowledge through working at our facilities. And so when you pair those things together, whether they're coming out of high school or graduating from one of the local colleges, they are career ready. And they're career ready without the debt that they may have had if they came from a four-year university, but they're just as competitive. And so we see that as a great way to leverage the community in which we live and work, but also infuse talent within our organization with people who are likely going to actually stay and want to be with us and be loyal to this company as well as to the community, and it becomes a cycle that we continue to give back to. I would say the key for me is, again, not only that exposure from a the technical aspect of learning, but also, as you talked about, Dr. Chetty, that mentorship. They're getting access to people they can see. You know, when they look and say, I know someone who, I can also connect with someone who, and that then gives them, again, that opportunity and that direct pathway to high demand jobs that they can stay right here where they grew up.
Yeah, very well said. And I think, for me, I mean, obviously, Michelin's a great example, from a corporate engagement perspective. And I think your partnerships with, very intentional partnerships, both with the school district and with Greenville Tech, are fantastic. So I really appreciate it, Tiffany. Dr. Chetty, I'm curious for your reflections on Tiffany's comments and maybe a little bit more on just sort of the importance of that education to, workforce pipeline.
I mean, it's fantastic to see the example of Michelin because at the end of the day, it underscores what I was saying earlier, that companies in the broader community can benefit from cultivating that talent, right? This is not just something we do out of charity or out of social interest. As you underscored, Michelin itself benefits when you have more talented workers you can hire. And I think the approach you're taking, it seems very consistent with what I showed in the Year Up data of not just technical training, but giving people those connections, those mentorship opportunities, et cetera, that help them, really see the pathway and not just learn a set of skills and then go out and find a job on their own. Maybe two things I'd suggest, again, on this theme of connecting, rather than discussing these three areas as three separate silos, I could imagine an effort to take those workforce training initiatives and target some of those special emphasis communities, go at the community level and say, are we reaching people? Look at the data on who's joining those programs, and my guess is it's not uniform across different parts of Greenville. Can you really target the places where you're trying to improve things the most and make kind of a concerted collaborative effort? And the other point I would make in this context and more generally is one of measurement. So when we see a program like what I showed you, Year Up, or there are other programs our team is analyzing, where we're able to see those really clear earnings gains emerge after people participate, that can really galvanize a community and galvanize investment from the private sector, from philanthropy, from government, perhaps expand support for the budget constraint that you described. If we can see that this is making workers more productive, changing the local community, that can make a big difference. And I think with the types of data our team's working with, that may actually be possible. So I would urge you to demonstrate the impacts that you're having in that measurable way.
Yeah, I think that last comment about measurement, I think, is one that we seem to always be chasing, certainly in the philanthropic field, without question, and nonprofit field, but something we need to focus on, without question. And I also really appreciate the the comment about really kind of focusing really at that kind of neighborhood level and applying a lot of the interventions and things that we're trying to do and really think about that at a more granular level in our community. Look, as we kind of wind down panel discussion this evening, I'm certainly reminded that all of us play a role in setting the conditions for economic mobility in our community, right? So, and we should want to do so because, again, and I know I said this before, I just think that when everyone is really, truly participating and contributing fully, like we really do all benefit, right? And so we really need to all kind of link arms in our community and figure out a way to help move people forward. I'd like to, with our panelists, and maybe Dr. Chetty as well, just leave us with, kind of a quick call to action, maybe something kind of tangible that we can be thinking about. You'll have to excuse Terrell. She was not feeling well beforehand, and she was doing yeoman's work by getting up here and delivering her 5 minutes. So I will make a plug on her behalf because I do think we have a real fantastic opportunity with the Move to Work initiative that is coming out of the ground now. And it is going to take, many of you are participating in it already, and are a lot of nonprofit partners that I see in the room providing some of those wraparound services. But I encourage people to get engaged with that initiative. Give Terrell a call, connect with her. There'll be more coming, on that initiative. But just encourage people to be thinking about that in the future. So Shannon and then Tiffany, and we'll close with Dr. Chetty.
Thank you. I would say that we want to continue to make investments throughout our neighborhoods. We know that neighborhood investment is very important, and also to fund and support our Greenville City Economic Development Corporation through what they're trying to do in growing economic mobility. But also the big thing that I would plug is that we are currently undergoing our Greenville 2040 5-year update. And this is the opportunity through our planning efforts as we look at Greenville 2040 is what are we going to focus on for the next 5 years? We've done a lot since we adopted Greenville 2040 in 2021, but where do we need to shift those efforts? And that's an opportunity for everyone in this room to come out and be engaged in that process as we're going through that right now.
Great, Tiffany?
Sure, and for me, I would maybe put the call to action to other companies. And I'll piggyback off what Dr. Chetty said is, when we do have these programs, how do we look at them and think about accessibility? And when I think about accessibility, it is one, starting with awareness. Are people even aware of the programs that we have, and how do we get into the communities and show them what's possible, show them what opportunities are out there? And I would even add on to that, do the work of helping them understand, because the perceptions, specifically for a company like Michelin, where we're in manufacturing, there may be perceptions that it's not something they want to do. But again, with programs like ours, where they get that firsthand experience, a kind of a trial period, anything that we can do to show what's possible and help them get access to those programs, I think will go a long way.
Well, it's been terrific to be part of this conversation. I think all of these ideas make a lot of sense. I would sum up just in simple terms by saying we should all try to connect people to opportunity. And we can do that ourselves at the individual level. You can think about people you could reach out to in your own community. You could help mentor, you could connect with. You could think about that through your institutions, as you all emphasized. You could think about that through your local government. And I think this matters, especially in this time of division in the United States, because opportunity, I've found, is a unifying theme. People of any political background, whatever they're coming from, tend to believe in the idea of equality of opportunity, that we can all rise together. And so I think especially at this time, this is a great agenda to be focusing on.
No, I really appreciate it. And just as a parting thought for me, one, I really appreciate and very grateful for you, joining us tonight at Furman, because when I joined Hollingsworth Funds in 2013, it wasn't just a year later that your economic mobility research was released. And it had a profound impact for all of us at Hollingsworth Funds and for many of us in this community, because we have been growing for quite some time and have kind of sensed some of those pressures. And a lot of your research has helped kind of frame up, how we try and go about this. So we've been trying to live that out. But I think you coming here and kind of reinforcing some of the concepts, but also bringing some of the newer aspects of your research, particularly around the social capital issue, I think is critically important. And also just want to thank, obviously, Tiffany, Shannon, and Terrell for your leadership and commitment. Look, we can make a difference in this community when we kind of link arms, and we've got some great leadership here, so I'm excited about that. I look to close out the session and this series. I'm gonna turn it over to Julie at the Riley Institute, and we'll get everybody home.
Thank you, Gage. Tonight marks the end of our 2025 Straight Talk series. However, I hope it sparks an ongoing interest for us and for our community in exploring what it will take to foster conditions for all people to not only live, but ultimately to thrive. We plan to continue to address themes surrounding economic mobility, considering the policies, efforts, and systemic changes needed for the American dream to fall within reach for every child and family, regardless of their starting place. So I hope you'll leave here tonight with our speakers' calls to action in mind, and that you'll stay engaged with our future work and programming. We're grateful to all of you for being with us these past few weeks. To close us out, I want to express our deepest gratitude to Dr. Chetty and this esteemed panel of local leaders for sharing your insights and expertise with us, and to Gage for moderating this panel and for your leadership with Hollingsworth Funds, whose generous support and partnership helped make this session possible. Many, many thanks for all of the passion and insight and expertise that all of you have shared tonight. Thank you. Thank you all again for being with us, and good night.